Good morning.
Morning.
First of all, I always love being here. There's a couple reasons for that. First of all, I love working with Sandy. She's such a creative person, and it's just a real joy to collaborate. Second, I have a lot of respect for you as a congregation. You actually do a lot, and I'd say well beyond the size of your congregation. I speak at a lot of places. I was once asked by a church that asked me to come what I expected to accomplish for my organization. I went, nothing, because that's typically what happens, and that's not what happens here. You all are very generous and actually put your beliefs into action, and I have a lot of respect for that. So I'm happy to be here and talk to you this morning about legacy. Well, I'm going to start with a quote from a great philosopher, the band Queen. And they once asked, who wants to live forever? More recently, I was reading an article in The Economist who was exploring the same question. And this article said, eternal life in heaven or through reincarnation is promised by many faiths. For a simple reason, it eases the fear of death. The idea of living forever has other devotees. It's now pursued by a motley crew of fringe scientists, cultish groups, tech billionaires, united by a conviction that a way to make humans immortal will eventually be found. Now, this same concept was explored by the psalmist in Psalm 16, who wrote this: "My body also will rest secure because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay." So what does that mean? We know that our bodies, our physical bodies, decay. Well, at least mine already is. And so I wonder what the psalmist is reflecting on with the idea of immortality, that our life would extend beyond our physical life, our physical body. And I'd like to challenge us to think about it in terms of legacy, of how we live our lives in such a way that it lives beyond our physical presence on this earth. And I'm thinking a lot about that. Frankly, because I'm 66 years old and I'm thinking about my career, what parts of my career have been, I think, most meaningful, and how to finish strong in not just my career, but in life. I was licensed to practice law 40 years ago last year. Yes, I know it's hard to believe it when I say that out loud. And so this is a point in time that I'm looking back over that 40-year career and thinking about what was most significant. Now, I went to SMU Law School. I got out, and I didn't really, I became a trial lawyer. And so I signed up for court-appointed criminal cases, and I tried cases for about 30 years. Civil cases, jury trials in state and federal court, and appeals and the various courts of appeals. And I dealt with cases that had a lot of money in controversy. But I say that to put in context what I'm about to say, that looking back over my career, the things that I think were the most significant and that I'm the proudest of were the pro bono cases that I worked on behalf of asylum seekers to our country. And it all began, I like telling this story because I did not set out to become a human rights lawyer. I just wanted to make a living and support my family. And so I had a single encounter that changed the course of my life and actually led me to be here with you this morning. I was representing a young man from El Salvador in a burglary case. And I got a call from Brad Ginter, who was a Mennonite missionary, who called me and said, "Bill, you're representing," gave me this guy's name. And I went, "Yeah." And he said, "Have you been to visit him in jail?" Because he was in jail, but his case was pending. I went, "Yes." He said, "What are you going to do on his case?" I went, "Who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm sure I'm a Mennonite missionary. I'm sure you're familiar with the Salvadoran Civil War." And I went, "Not really." And he said, "Well, there are civil wars in Guatemala and El Salvador. It's driving thousands of people to flee, come here to seek safety in the United States. And I'm working with them here in Dallas." And then I said something, and I gave it no thought at all, and it changed my whole life. I said, if you ever need a hand, give me a call. And so he did. And I started out doing mechanics liens for unpaid workers, and then guardianships for unaccompanied minors, children whose parents were dead or missing in the war. They're up here living with a brother, sister, aunt, or uncle. And at that time, there was no legal relief in immigration for those kids. There is now. But at that time, there was not. And so I was just helping them with guardianship so that the kids could get enrolled in school. And then I took an asylum law training. My first client was a woman from Guatemala. Her husband was a labor leader in a truckers union. They were taking their kids to school one morning. A car pulled up, grabbed him, pulled him into the car, took off. And then a few days later, she was called to come identify his body in the morgue. Now then she started getting death threats to she and her children, and she left. She came up here to the United States seeking safety. She was a young mother, so she came up here with her young kids. She went to Catholic Charities here. They took her case, and then they asked me to, they assigned the case to me as a pro bono case. I helped her get asylum, she and her family, and I thought, this is the most rewarding thing I've ever done as a lawyer. Give me another one of those cases, and I did that for about 25 years. And then the agency I lead now, Human Rights Initiative, started in 2000, and I started taking cases from them the first year they opened, and I did that for 12 years until I became the executive director here. So the reason this work is so meaningful to me, frankly, is that the people that I've had the privilege to represent have been such inspiring people. And it's why I'm so passionate about it. And it's why I'm so, I can't think of a better word, just angry when asylum seekers are held up to ridicule or criticism, because it's so contrary to my decades of experience representing people. And I could just sit here and tell you stories all day of the people I've had the good fortune to represent, but I'll just do one because it's such I'm pretty sure I've told that story here before, but it bears repeating because it's such a powerful one. And this young man from Ethiopia, he was a school teacher. He'd been a political activist from the time of Haile Selassie, protesting feudalistic land policies. But then he was a school teacher, and one day he was teaching school. Men came into the classroom with AK-47s, arrested another teacher, arrested some students, all of whom were involved in student government, took him straight to prison. I said, was there a trial? He said, no, we were told we were counter-revolutionaries. He was there for 5 years in prison. They drank untreated river water. They had no medical care to speak of, and inadequate food. And then after 5 years, they said, okay, you're rehabilitated, you may go. And so he was released and went to, of course, he lost his job as a teacher because that was a government job. And so he and his wife put together enough money to buy a bus. And they started a small transportation business. And they used that as an opportunity to distribute literature for opposition parliamentary candidates all over the country of Ethiopia. And as a result of that, he was arrested because of his political activism. I tried this case. I represented him in immigration court, which is on the 10th floor of the federal courthouse. These are very adversarial proceedings. Government's represented by an attorney, and the judges tend to be very harsh on asylum seekers. So they're not easy cases. So this man was on the stand. I was doing his direct examination, and I said, "Sir," at that time he was 62 years old. And I said, "Sir, you've been an activist from the time you were a student." And he said, "Yes, that's true." And I said, "And you've been politically active, and because of that activism, you've been arrested 5 different times." He said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, every time you were arrested, you were beaten, weren't you?" And he said, "Yes, I was." And I said, "And the last time you were in prison, you were tortured." And he said, "That's true." And I said, "Describe your torture for the court," which he did. He did it in detail for the judge. And then I said, "And sir, Every single time you were released from prison, they told you to stop your political activity, didn't they? And he said, yeah, they did. And I said, but you didn't. Why? And this 62-year-old man literally got tears in his eyes, looked at the court and said, because there is a price for freedom, there's a cost for democracy. I did that for my family. And I'm going to let that sink in a minute, because how often in your life have you met someone like that? Well, I've met a lot of people like that, and I've had the opportunity to meet them, and I'm always struck by just how courageous these people are and how fortunate I am to get the opportunity to go to court and stand up and advocate for them, and how fortunate is our country that this man chose to come here and live in our country. And why wouldn't we welcome him as someone that we value and think our country is better because he is here? So that's why. And I've represented people from 21 different countries, poll watchers from Togo, Iranian Christians, Pakistani Christians, Egyptian Coptic Christians, pro-democracy activists from Zimbabwe, Christians from Eritrea, people that have faced prison and torture, sometimes just because of who they are, their identity, other times because of their activism and their courage in either practicing their faith or advocating for a change in the political system. And so I look back over having done that for decades and again, realize just how important that work is, and how if I have a legacy, professional legacy, I believe it will be that. And because no one's going to say, yes, Bill, he once repossessed tractor trailers for a bank. Well, nobody's going to, no one's going to celebrate that at the end of if they do, then there's something's gone wrong. And so as I reflect on my career, I'm reminded by these words from David Brooks. He wrote this column in the New York Times in 2015. And he wrote this: "It occurred to me that there are two sets of virtues, the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are the skills you bring to the marketplace. The eulogy virtues are the ones that are talked about at your funeral. Whether you were kind, brave, honest, or faithful, were you capable of great love? We all know eulogy virtues are more important than resume virtues. But our culture and educational systems spend more time teaching the skills and strategies you need for career success than the qualities you need to radiate that sort of inner light. Most of us are clearer on how to build an external career than how to build internal character." I read that quote for my mother-in-law died this year. She was 95 years old. She has virtually nothing in the way of physical assets. She did not have a really impressive career, and she had a physical disability that she really struggled with for decades, most of her life. However, she was one of the best people I've ever known, because she chose not to be bitter. She chose to be kind, to be a good listener, and she brightened the life of everyone that she encountered, including mine, which is what I said at her graveside memorial service. And everyone there nodded because they realized that was true for Virginia. She was that kind of person. And so without regard to her professional achievement or her financial achievement, she had cast great ripples through the seas that she traveled through in life. So I want to take a moment and reflect over, as we're talking about careers, 3 lawyers that have inspired me. So I live I practice in the realm of law. And so even though you may not live in law, I do. And so the examples I'm giving this morning are lawyers that inspired me. And as I tell you their stories, you'll understand why, and why they're serving to inspire me now as a 66-year-old man. The first, I knew 2 of these men personally. And the first 2 are people you probably haven't heard of before, but they're really important in our community and to me personally. The first was Parker Wilson. Parker died in 2005 at 83 years old. He was a lawyer for Sears and Roebuck for 30 years. But at the age of 60, he founded Proyecto Adelante, which was the only legal service organization in the city that was providing free legal services to Salvadoran asylum seekers. And he did that at 60 after his retirement. But that's not when he started doing work that changed the community. These are things he did while he was practicing law for Sears. In the 1950s and 1960s, he and his wife grew irked at the Jim Crow laws, and so they opened up their home as a meeting place to discuss and explore racial issues in an era when it was really unpopular to do so. His daughter said that the police would often show up at their home in University Park because of the interracial nature of the groups that were gathering in their home. And then he became a volunteer with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the NAACP, and the East Dallas Community Center, the South Dallas Information Center, and the Greater Dallas Housing Opportunity Center, and finally the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, which was a group, CISPAS, by the way, that was targeted by the FBI. These were people really putting their lives on the line on behalf of people seeking asylum here in the United States. And he did lots of different things. I had the privilege of knowing him way into his 70s. He was still going to Proyecto every day and representing Salvadoran and Guatemalan asylum seekers. And he did that as long as he was physically able. Vanna Slaughter, who was for many years the legal director at Catholic Charities, said this about him. He kept us all focused and wouldn't allow any of us to become dissuaded in our work. He was called by what we all felt was the injustice of our foreign policy. He was a real model for us all. Second name is L.A. Bedford. Another man I was privileged to know, not terribly well known outside of legal circles, but people who knew him respected him. So L.A. Bedford was born in the State Thomas area of Dallas. He went to Booker T. Washington High School because when he was born, or when he came of age, law schools in Texas were segregated. So he couldn't attend law school in the state of Texas. He went to Brooklyn, got his law degree, came back here and practiced law for many, many years, which is how I met him. He had a very active probate practice and was a very competent lawyer and also a real gentleman. But his work was, he along with other people that should be household names in our city, and sadly are not, W.J. Durham and C.B. Bunkley, all three of them African-American attorneys that did civil rights work. They represented the Wiley and Bishop College students who were arrested participating in sit-ins. So Darwin Payne, a local author, wrote a biography of L.A. Bedford, and he said he was a very humble man, which is how he came across. And frankly, for much of the time I knew him, I had no idea of his really extensive civil rights background because it's not something he talked about. It's just something he did. And so Darwin Payne said this, and everything he talked about, he downplayed his role. But other people who knew him did not downplay his role. Peter Johnston, who is still here as an activist here in the city, but knew L.A. back in the 60s and 70s, he said this. He said, Bedford is miscast as a behind-the-scenes player. He picketed H.L. Green department stores, segregated lunch counters, and he was all over the state of Texas with other lawyers fighting for legal and civil rights. And he did this when it was very dangerous, and being a lawyer didn't protect you from the Ku Klux Klan and other white racists of the state. When he was 64, he wrote an article for the Dallas Bar Head Notes called When I Am an Old Lawyer and Can No Longer Stand Before the Bar. He wrote this, I will tell all who listen that no accumulation of wealth can bring the joy and satisfaction that one receives by knowing that his efforts help to loose the legal shackles that we as a people have borne for over 300 years. And then he went on to write this: I will remind my listeners that hate clusters flourish in these United States, spreading their venom throughout the land. And to those who say it can't happen here, I tell them it has happened before and it can happen again. So that's how he was talking about law and justice way into his 60s. The last name is not somebody who is well known in the city at all. I've discovered this man, George Edwards, in reading Bill Munataglio's book about Texas politics, A Single Star and Bloody Knuckles. I commend the book. It's a really good book about many people that were fighters for justice, progressives, that are not taught, they're really not taught in Texas history. And of course, it's even harder to teach accurate Texas history than it was when I was a young person in the 1820s. Mr. Edwards was born in 1877. His first career was as an educator. He was very involved in doing creating education for the children who were laboring in the cotton mills. Of course, this area was a huge producer of cotton. And so there was a lot of child labor, children that were laboring in these cotton mills, and of course were not getting an adequate education. So he worked with the bishop of the Episcopal Church here to create night schools for those kids. He lost his job as an educator because he was a socialist. And so he decided that he would instead become a lawyer. And so he read law, which was how you became a lawyer back in 1910. When he became a lawyer, you would study under an older lawyer, and then the Dallas bar would allow you to practice law. There was no bar exam. There was no, really law schools to speak of at the time. So his very first case as a lawyer was representing Allen Brooks. Allen Brooks, you may remember his name from the Equal Justice Institute historical marker that we put up in downtown Dallas commemorating his life. Mr. Brooks was accused of rape. He was put on trial. His trial was going on in Old Red Courthouse when a mob broke into the courthouse and pulled him out of the second floor window and lynched him on the streets of downtown Dallas. Mr. Edwards was his lawyer. He was sitting there with him when they pulled him out of the window. And rather than being discouraged, the experience led him to fight for justice throughout his entire career. And so that's a really remarkable thing. So he saw this great injustice of a lynching, and he thought, no, I'm going to fight against this as long as I can. And he did. So he was one of the few white lawyers in the city that would represent black people. He represented injured Mexican workers. He sued people that were making usurious loans to people. In 1931, he was representing two labor organizers who were members of the Communist Party. He bailed them out of jail, and the Klan seized him him and these two communists on the streets of downtown Dallas, took him into the Trinity River bottoms and beat the two communists, and then let them go. The two workers escaped, left, and made their way to St. Louis, Missouri. Mr. Edwards was, if you research his name, you'll find he wrote lots of letters to the editor to the Dallas Morning News, and he advocated for civil rights, including advocating against the Dallas Bar Association, which was a segregated bar association, and fighting for criticizing the very bar association that he was a member of. This is my favorite part. And at the age of 78 in 1956, the year of my birth, he made his last court appearance. He served as local counsel alongside Thurgood Marshall and representing the NAACP when the state of Texas was trying to shut down the NAACP as an organization permitted to operate in the state of Texas. They had a trial in Marshall, and that he said that the judge called Thurgood Marshall up to the bench and said, "Who is the white lawyer who is there at the bench at the counsel table with you?" And Mr. Marshall responded and said, "Well, Mr. Edwards tells me that he does not want history to record that there was not a single white lawyer in the state who was unwilling to stand up on behalf of the NAACP." When he died, he was going to have a interracial funeral. One of his pallbearers was the lawyer I mentioned earlier, W.J. Durham, a black lawyer. No church in the city of Dallas would permit the funeral, a multiracial funeral, except for one, First Unitarian Church in Dallas, and that was where his funeral took place. One of the at his memorial service, one of the local activists said this. The activist said, "I found this quote of Oliver Wendell Holmes, and it illustrates Mr. Edwards' life. It is required of a man that he should take part in the actions and passions of his time at the peril of being judged not to have lived." So I want to end with two words that I think characterize all of these lawyers and I hope guide me for whatever remains of my career. First is the word fight. These men were fighters, and they fought their entire careers for justice. And we have a fight on our hands now. The fight is not getting any easier. The rights of trans people are being attacked by our state. The rights of homosexuals are being attacked by our state. The rights of immigrants are being attacked by our state. All of these things are going on right now, and we should use whatever means we have. And for me, it's a law degree to fight against those people and fight for this to be a more just state. And I suspect I know what you're thinking, because I think it. Well, actually, before I say that, I want to use the patron saint of Texas, Molly Ivins, who said this about fighting. "So keep fighting for freedom and justice, but don't forget to have fun doing it. Be outrageous, rejoice in all the oddities that freedom can produce, and when you get through celebrating the sheer joy of a good fight, be sure to tell those who come after how much fun it was." So the second word, and it's the word that I think I've actually talked about this before because it's frankly the hardest thing for us, is hope. Because that litany of things I said we need to fight about can seem hopeless, particularly with the state of our government. And so what does hope even mean? Do we actually hope that we're going to accomplish in the short term change? Well, I ran across this quote from Václav Havel, who is a Czech dissident, later the president of the Czech Republic. And he said this: "Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or a willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed." And if you study justice movements, you realize that those are the people that have changed the world. Those are the people that have persisted for an entire lifetime fighting for change, and maybe they didn't even see it. Because think about the long fight for emancipation. Think about the long fight for suffrage, for the vote for women. Think about the long fight to battle segregation in my home state of Alabama. These were people who had to fight for decades. And who are we to think that that's not what's going to be required of us? And this is important, because it is what I have to be resolved for as an individual as I think about whatever is left of my career. Because that is the way to create a life beyond our physical presence here in the world. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to y'all today.
Thank you so much. And by the way, just a quick reminder, L.A. Bedford's grandson will be with us the last week in February to give us a survey of the civil rights movement in this area where we live. So thanks for introducing his granddad to us.